going back to
Perfect.
1989, your album is finally coming out after 30 years or so. Who's it that got the ball rolling on that one?
Well, it's an amazing story, really. I mean, it all came down to an audio cassette in the end. It was.
Right.
I was in India last year with my wife because it's a place that we love and we visit a lot. And I got around about this time of the year, and I got an email from Marty, my guitar player in the band, our great friend, and he sent me 2 MP3s of these songs, and he said, "Listen to these." And they sounded great. And I just said, "Wow, I haven't heard these in 30 years. And he said, "Yeah," he said, "They sound really good." So I said, "Send me the rest." So he did. And in the meantime, I got very excited about it. And he sent them to Tommy Vicari, who's our engineer producer, who's really part of the band. I mean, he's the sort of 5th invisible member of the band. And Tommy did a bit of mastering magic, digital mastering on the cassette. And this is what we have. This is our album, because we've since found some of the multi-tracks, but a couple of them have gone missing completely, So,
right.
So this is we were literally one dodgy cassette away from oblivion with this album. It's come back from the dead. So who knows? But I mean, it's just very gratifying to hear it after all these years and have people say nice things about it, because weirdly it does. Although it's very much of its time and it's a kind of time capsule, and people are very kind of at the moment very nostalgic for the 80s and stuff, but at the same time, it's the real deal. It's music that was being made then, it's just that no one's ever heard it before. So someone asked me the other day whether it was old or new music. I said, well, it's old if you've written it 30 years ago, but it's new if you've only just heard it, So,
Right.
But it's getting a really great, it's getting great receptions, which is very gratifying, because a lot of the lyrical themes in the songs are things which people just didn't want to engage with in 1989, whereas now they're the main subject of every, political, sociological debate there is, and it's not all about the environment and stuff. I mean, it was just a time of amazing events, we just had Chernobyl, the Berlin Wall was coming down, people started to acquire some consciousness about the Amazon and the importance to the whole kind of planet, about the ozone layer, all these different things. And of course, it sounded very crankish at the time. Everybody thought that, bonkers, they'd taken too much ayahuasca, and sort of. But the truth of it is that they just didn't want to hear it because it was a very inconvenient truth, And to quote the, that thing, it is a very inconvenient truth. And we haven't done an awful lot in 30 years to mitigate it. But I do have a feeling that things are changing because people's awareness and consciousness is changing, and I think people really want things to change. And if this COVID thing, as disastrous as it is, if it's shown us anything, it's that, the planet has this incredible capacity to rebound, kind of just given the tiniest bit of a chance. It's only been, 2 months or something, and already the air is clean in Delhi, and the kind of, there are fish in the canals in Venice, and it's like, the whole world's going, whoa, great, Not that I'm suggesting we should shut the world down for 3 months every year, but it is interesting how the effects of this will inform the debate about the environment for the next, for the foreseeable future. And it's entirely possible. I don't know, but it's entirely possible that a process that might have taken 40 or 50 years might take 5 or 10 years now, because it's such a thing, it's so big and it's important. It's such an important sort of element in people's thinking now. They're thinking about their kids, they're thinking about the kind of world they want to live in. Who wants to go and live in Delhi again when the air's been fresh and clean and wonderful? Who wants to go back to that stinking pollution? I mean, people are going to demand changes from their governments, and let's hope, let's see what happens. Rock on. We've got some great music, and the thing I love about World Goes Round, and I've always loved about it, is that my 3 bandmates are 3 of the hippest, most amazing musicians I've ever worked with. So they, to have that work that we did together finally come to light is really, really absolutely an amazing surprise and a wonderful kind of treat, And also to have it, to actually go, yeah, it's all right, it was pretty good. It is pretty good. So that's, you can sort of say that after 30 years, I think, you get found out after 30 years.
Well, a lot of descriptions of it, they called you guys a supergroup because all of you had legitimate credits. This was not the first thing you worked on. This was not the last thing that you worked on. Do you like hearing that description of supergroup?
Oh, I don't take it too seriously. I mean, I think it is a really viable and a really powerful group, just because of the level of musicianship, that we have, and it meets our you know, you can only be as good as your heroes, really, you know, and you know, our heroes were Steely Dan, you know, Don Henley, Peter Gabriel, those people, because they not only made unbelievable records, but they also had a perspective and a point of view about the world, and they felt that they had a platform without preaching to people, without being too boring and heavy. You know, they just had a platform to talk about stuff which wasn't just the usual generic kind of, you know, LA writers pool kind of song. Not that there's anything wrong with that, you know, it's perfectly fine. But, you know, if people want, the people that gravitate towards artists do it because of the depths of their personality. And when you're writing for other people, we were all pro songwriters and we were all doing well at it, but it was very frustrating. You know, you can't write a song that has even if it sounds like a smash, you can't write a song that has, you know, references to burning the Amazon and you know, refugees in East Berlin, you know, kind of if you're trying to get a cover by, you know, whoever it is, you know, that sort of, it's just not on the agenda. So to have our own vehicle, I think we were always slightly jealous of the fact that, you know, artists got to actually sing the songs, you know. And to be really honest, as a pro writer, I mean, I've had a lot of covers. And
yes, you have.
Probably,
and I do want to ask you about that.
Well, we can talk about that, yeah. But I mean, the thing about it, more than anything else, is that sadly, I mean, I'm grateful for every single cover, however doggy it might be. But I actually think that in retrospect, about 90% of the covers that I've had are pretty disappointing, in the sense that they don't live up to my what I had hoped for and expected for from the song. And that's no criticism of the artist or anything else. They clearly had a different perspective. They had a different view of things. But, you know, if you're a creator, you get very jealous about your creation, you know, and then something, right, there's a moment where you have to let go of it and put it out there. And it's always very difficult. And, you know, the ones that are great, you know, the Freddie Mercurys, the Shaka Khans, the Dionne Warwicks, you know, the Bette Midlers, the Jeffrey Osbornes, those are the ones that make you go, okay, this is great. No one could do this better. This is kind of the benchmark. But it is frustrating when you hear something which is a hit, and it's really not as good as the demo. And that's kind of sad, you know. I know this is a writer talking, and you would expect a writer to have that perspective. You know, it's kind of perfectionism gone mad, you know. There's a terrible story that if I can take the minute to tell it.
Sure, absolutely.
We were, Dominic, my old writing partner, and I were having a real hot streak, and we were writing more and more for kind of R&B people. We'd been writing for Shaka Khan and various people, and we did a film, slightly cheesy film, but good fun, you know, a Jackie Collins film in England called The World is Full of Married Men, and Bette Midler recorded the theme, and a few other people, Bonnie Tyler and several people recorded it. But the great thing was that we got to produce the soundtrack album, and we produced a song called Every Woman in the World with Billy Ocean, who, you know Billy's voice. I mean,
Caribbean Queen and Get Out of My Church, Get Into My Car.
One of the great, powerful soul voices, you know, with that element of pop in it, you know. And we wrote this song, you know, which we loved, as a kind of Teddy Pendergrass type, you know, leave it all on the microphone kind of song, you know, which, you know, he duly did. Dear Billy, you know, he did the most unbelievable vocal. So we had a fantastic version of the song, and we were really happy. Next thing I know, I get a cassette from Clive Davis, bless him, who has always been, I have to say, our greatest friend and proponent. He's always, I mean, the amount of songs of mine that he's plucked out of the air and said, this would be good for so-and-so, this would be good for so-and-so. So he's been one of our greatest supporters. I can't criticize him at all. But just by way of saying how stupid songwriters can be, he sent me a cassette. He said, there's this new band from Australia, and they've recorded Every Woman in the World. And I go, Australia? Wow, that's not known for its soulfulness. Oh, well, fair enough. So anyway, I listened to, you know, the version by Air Supply, and I was shocked because, you know, it just wasn't what I was expecting at all. It was so kind of pop and in its own kind of thing, you know. So I actually had the temerity, you can imagine, I was in my 20s, I had the temerity to send a telegram to Clive saying, please, Clive, I don't think this is very good. I don't think you should release it. And then, you know, when it was sitting at number 3 with a bullet in the Billboard chart, I kind of learned to love it. And I had to sort of go back and eat humble pie and say, no, Clive, you were right. You were absolutely right. This song, you know, is perfect for them. And of course it is. And it's a beautiful record that they made of it. It's just, it was completely off my radar. I'd never conceived of the song that way, you know. So bless them. You know, I love Air Supply and I love what they've done, and they've done several of my tunes, but it was just not, you know how you get on rails about something, you know, and then nothing else will do, you know, and then So anyway, except if you're sitting in the top 5 in Billboard, then that's a moment to kind of reassess your thinking.
Right. You can kind of do what you want after that happens a few times. And that did happen for you a few times. And your success continued into the 90s and the 2000s, and the songs are still being covered. And you're, I think, the only outside writer that Queen used. Do I have that right? If not, the only one of 2 or 3?
Well, there was another guy called David Bowie, but apart, no one's ever heard of him.
Yeah. He'll do
Under Pressure was very much a duet with Queen and David Bowie, but this one had a really weird kind of genesis. It was a sort of it was a strange moment. I was living in Laurel Canyon. I had the sort of the songwriter's kind of basic wet dream. The beautiful house with the studio around the sequoia in the middle of the house and all that stuff. And beautiful girlfriend who was incredibly talented and great singer. And although we were breaking up at the time, that's another thing. But she's part of the band, Elizabeth. We've been amazing friends ever since. But just a very creative kind of hub. Lots of people coming and going, using the studio. When we weren't using the studio, we had all sorts of creative people coming in. Bernie Taupin came in and did his solo record there. Jazzy, I can't remember who came in, but lots and lots of different people came in, and it was great. And Brian May, I got a call from Jack Nelson, who was my manager at the time, who sadly died this week from coronavirus. I just found out today, which is so shout out to Jack. I salute you, wonderful man. And he said to me, Brian's on his own in town. He's really depressed. He's very down. He doesn't, he's on his own, and he's breaking up from his wife, and he could use a cup of tea and an understanding kind of ear, So he came up to the house, and he was lovely. He was a fantastic guy. And we got it. You all right with that?
Yeah, sorry. I randomly got a Google call. When you get on those do not add spam lists, there's the 2 a day, and they had to interrupt Frank, which is not cool because you were telling a great story about Brian May, to say the least.
No, I can pick it up. It's all right, don't worry. No, so Brian was going through a huge emotional trauma at the time. And, to be fair, Elizabeth and I were not on the greatest sort of terms either. But we were still writing together and singing together, and we loved our kind of creative relationship. So anyway, after a few times that Brian came to visit, he was literally, tearing himself, torn to pieces about this situation. And, there's only so much you can say in the terms of, have another cup of tea and there. Finally, I sort of handed him my guitar and I said, look, Brian, we have to use this and do something with it, because we were all going through the same thing. And interestingly, the 3 of us sat there in a room, with a couple of guitars and a piano, and just the song came out of the air, because of how we were all feeling about, too much love will kill you. The whole idea of it is that, if you're in love with 2 people, but you're leaving one for another one, it's like tearing skin off the bone. It's an incredibly difficult, hard thing to do. So it's a very heartfelt song, but I never in a million years thought it was going to be a Queen track. We just recorded it. We put it down. Brian played this beautiful piano part on a sort of interesting kind of synth piano thing. And which also is a story, because when he went back to England, he called me up and he said, I played it to the other members of the band and we'd like to cut it. Freddie loves it. So I said, well, this is amazing. Wow, fantastic. And he said, do you mind if we have the original 24 track, the analog track? Because he said, he said, I've tried to re-record the piano. It just doesn't have the same sound. It doesn't have the same feel. There's something about that demo piano that everybody's in love with. So I sent him the multi-track. And that multi-track recorded in my funky little studio is the basis of Too Much Love Will Kill You. That very distinctive piano sound played by Brian, beautifully. And then Roger overdubbed the drums, and Freddie, of course, did his unbelievable vocal to it, which was just spine chilling. That's definitely in the top 10% of the top 10% of the covers that I've ever had. It was amazing, And, to find out afterwards, we suspected, but to find out afterwards that Freddie had been so ill that he had to really, really, really work to get that vocal, literally taking rests between verses and things like that. And he just put his heart and soul into it, really. It still kind of makes me weep when I listen to it. It's amazing. But then, of course, weirdly, just as with World Goes Round, that sat in a box for 30 years, suddenly it got left off the album, because I think there were lots of reasons why it got left off the album, but it was supposed to come out on an album called The Miracle, which had the four faces kind of.
Right. And I believe that was the one after Made in Heaven.
Exactly. No, Made in Heaven was the posthumous one. That was the last one, which it did appear on. but it was supposed to come out in 1988, you know, and which is a shame because the album did unbelievably well. But anyway, I think the real reason was that the tabloids had kind of really got wind of the fact that Freddie was ill, and nobody was admitting it because there was a huge stigma at the time attached to it and everything. And he just didn't want to kind of get involved in all of that stuff. And you can imagine what the headlines would have been if it was Too Much Love Will Kill You, you know, with Freddie Mercury singing it when all the rumors around that he's, you know, he's got AIDS and he's dying. And so it was a pretty, you know, ghastly period. But the song in the end had an amazing life and an amazing kind of journey and still goes on. You know, Brian recorded it first and had a huge hit with it all over Europe. Then it was featured in the Freddie Mercury tribute concert in 1991 at Wembley.
Yes.
That was the first time anyone had ever heard it in public. And I was sitting in a crowd of 75,000 people. And Brian, so I had no idea he was going to do it. And Brian suddenly just went to the front of the stage. Everybody went off stage and he said, I'm going to play something new now, which is for Freddie. And I went, oh my God, he's going to play it, you know. And he sat down at the piano and played this song. And, you know, the old Wembley Stadium was pretty noisy, you know, and you could not hear a pin drop. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting there, typical paranoid writer, thinking this is dying a death here. You know, this is going, because, you know, they've previously been like Radio Gaga and all, you know, all the sort of
Guns N' Roses,
participation stuff, you know. And here I am in Wembley Stadium with, you know, can't hear a pin drop. And then he gets to the end of the first chorus where he sings the sort of Too Much Love Will Kill You Every Time. And the whole place just goes and sort of erupted like a, you know, football crowd's noise. And honestly, it was like having 5,000 volts pass through my body. I'd never had an experience like it. I was sort of sitting in there and just resisted the temptation to say to the person next to me, by the way, that's my song. They would have told me to, you know what. But it was just an incredible experience. And eventually, when they made Made in Heaven, which was all the stuff that Freddie had recorded before he died, so it was basically the last Queen album, that was featured on that as well. And so Freddie's version came out. So they both had a big hit with it. You know, Brian had a hit with it in his own right, and Queen had a hit with it, which was also very satisfying as well. You know, because it would have been a shame for the world not to hear that vocal of Freddie's. I think it was really
right. Most artists that I encounter, if they had one or two of your credits, they would be using that as a calling card for the rest of their life. You know, every time they go into the bar, somebody goes, you know, that guy wrote a Queen song. and then when I look at yours, I see Pavarotti is a credit in Cher and Clapton and Air Supply. At a certain point, let me rephrase this. Right now, do you love the fact that you were in the background, that you could walk around unbothered? Or do you sometimes, so you never had the moment of going, man, I wish they knew it was me?
Darren, you know, that's a very, clearly you know about the psychology of writers and artists, because part of me always wanted to be the guy with the microphone. You know, part of me, I won't lie to you, you know, even if it's Freddie, and then Freddie could, you know, sing anybody into a cocked hat, you know. There's part of you, there's the part of you that goes, you know, I wrote that. You know, it's like Paul Simon's story about, you know, when he would leave the stage when Art Garfunkel would sing Bridge Over Troubled Water, and he said night after night, he'd stand there in the wings, and Garfunkel would be taking all the applause, and he'd be going, I wrote that.
Right.
You know what I mean? So there is that ego thing. But to be very honest, I very much believe that things happen for a reason and the way they should. And then by not being famous, by being a kind of backroom boy, by being in the middle of doing what I do, my God, I've been so lucky. You know, I worked with Quincy Jones and Arif and George Martin and all sorts of amazing producers and engineers and musicians. So I've had absolutely my dreams come true musically. I also had the possibility of having a life, because you can move anonymously through the world, and no one's that interested in songwriters, you know, particularly, and which is a good thing, you know. So I'm old enough now to realize that not being famous when you're 21 is probably a really good thing. You know?
I get different answers all the time. I interview a lot of songwriters. Holly Knight was a recent example.
Yeah,
you could tell that she wanted to still be out front, like, I wrote that.
Yeah.
But you have a more subdued approach, I can tell from speaking to you and all that. So bringing it all together here, you got this reissue, if we want to call it a reissue, coming out. Are you still writing much, or what are you working on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been working with, I started my career with Dominic King, Dominic
Yes.
Biagatti, as we were known. And, you know, we really kind of came up together and learned our chops together and had the similar aspirations. You know, we wanted to work in America. We wanted to work with great recording musicians and stuff. Not that it was bad in England. We worked with the best people in England as well. But you know, the grass is always greener. You know, when you hear Jeff Porcaro playing drums, you only want to be in a studio with Jeff Porcaro. You know, it's
of course.
You know,
Yes.
So I had that great privilege of working with these extraordinary musicians who were kind enough and generous enough not to kind of pull rank and go, do you know what, you're just a songwriter, you can play kind of 3 chords, you know, a few majors and a few minors, and they can play anything kind of thing. You know, if anything, Jeff Porcaro, the first day of recording of a Dukes album way back in 1981, they had just been making an album with Aretha Franklin, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, Aretha says to me, okay, go in and do a guide vocal. And I'm in there with Jeff Porcaro, Robbie Buchanan, Abe Laboriel playing bass, and Steve Lukather playing guitar. And I'm thinking, oh Christ, you know, this is going to die.
Right.
I'm going to die here, you know. And in the first take, I really did die, and I was thinking, this is just terrible. You know, I mean, it was 10 o'clock on a Monday morning as well. Anyway, Jeff, of all people, who had the reputation of being quite stern and quite rough, he came and put his arm around me and he said, hey man, he said, we can't do what you do. You know, he said, we're here to make you look good. You know, just relax, enjoy it. You know, and I'm going. That was about one of the most, you know, those pivotal moments that happen in your life. There was something about his generosity at that moment that made me think, hey, you know, I can get up on any damn stage and I can do this. You know, I don't have to live down anything. I don't have to live down the fact that I went to university or came from England or anything else. You know, that I didn't grow up a poor sharecropper and kind of, you know, get to drink Jack Daniels all day kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's
Of course.
You know, I remember Tim Rice saying to me, you know, I actually said in an interview once, someone asked him what it was like being a kind of rock and roller when he likes cricket and he sort of has a posh accent. And he says, well, unfortunately, I didn't have the advantage of a working class education. You know, it's like, there was a lot of prejudice against people who'd been to university in the music business in those days. First record deal we got with CBS Records, the head of business affairs sent, because my partner and I had just come down from Cambridge University, and the head of business affairs, when we signed for them, sent a memo around to the company saying, we've just signed the singing solicitors. You know, it was like a really great way to, and we were so embarrassed because we just thought, you know, we don't want anybody to know this stuff. You know, we want to be legit. We want to be, you know, recording artists. And it was just it was almost a stigma, you know, it was a weird thing. Now, I suppose people think, oh, well, that's great. You know, there's lots of people, you know, like,
well, didn't all of Radiohead go to Cambridge or Oxford or both?
Yeah, I mean, they're all kind of very, very well educated guys. And of course, people like, you know, bands like Genesis and stuff, Peter Go, you know, they went to Charterhouse. They went to one of the best kind of public schools in England, you know, so it's all a, you know, or Coldplay, you know, they went to Sherborne, which is one of the great public schools in England. So, you know, but at the time, many years ago, you know, if you were a middle class boy with an education, you were not expected to go into rock and roll, you know. But, you know, we had to break that door down somehow. Like we had to also break down the door that white boys didn't sing the blues. I mean, my God, the trouble we got into for not fitting the white rock and roll mold, you know, it was really, I mean, these days anything goes, you know, nobody cares anymore. It's great. You know, I love it. I mean, the kids they get online, they just look at stuff that was made 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and they go, yeah, this is great. And they don't care where it came from or what the people look like or where, they're just into the music, you know. But there was an awful lot of stuff that we had to battle against, even as writers, because, you know, when you sit down as a writer, of course you want to target, you know, a singer, you know, or a band or whatever that you're working with. At the same time, you know, you have your own instincts and your own roots and things. And you know, people in the record companies would say, oh, no, you can't say that, that's too country. Or, you know, you can't play that guitar if it's too R&B. And it's like, well, who made the rules? Who made you God? You know, it's like, the only way things become new is by cross-fertilizing and you know, taking things from here and taking things from there, you know. And you know, you listen to any of the great people like Mark Ronson now, you know, and he's harking back to the 70s. He's got Uptown Up. He's playing Nothing Breaks Like a Heart. You know, he's Dolly Parton. You know, I mean, it's like he's got everything. He's going for the whole thing, and it's fantastic because people aren't saying, "Well, Mark, you can't do that. You know, that's you know, you're white. You know, and you're Jewish. How can that work?" You know, it's like, no. You know, if it works, it works. You know. And what's crazy is I used to love going into recording studios in America because you'd see a horn section and there would be 2 black guys, an Italian, a Jewish guy, you know, kind of an Armenian, and they're all in it, and they're all so funky and together and absolutely kind of on it.
Right.
And you know, the music was the great leveler. There was no issue of race or color or background. There was one question: were you good enough? Could you cut it? You know, did you have the chops or the song or whatever to cut it at that level? That's all they're interested in. It's like the Olympics. They don't give a damn where you come from, you know. And it's great. I mean, I love that. That's how it should be. So why it should be, you know, compartmentalized and kind of labeled after that, I guess people have to do it because that's how they sell music. But it's quite nice to be in a band because the band itself can be the brand and you can do what the hell you want musically. You know, that's what I like about it. I mean, this album is very wide ranging. You know, Big House is just one area of what we do, but you know, we have some sort of country-ish songs on there with fabulous vocals by Elizabeth and amazing, you know, guitar by Marty. We've got some funkier things, which Jeff did because his tradition is more R&B. He used to play drums for Shaka Khan. So it's a great train wreck of styles, you know, and we've got a bit of country rock in there because I love the Eagles and, you know, J.D. Souther and all those guys. So there is a nice mix of stuff, and it sounds weirdly, because it's us, it sounds like us. That sounds so boring to say, but it's true. You know, it's like, yeah, I can hear each person's contribution on each of the tracks, you know, and that makes me feel very good. I guess the best thing of it is that 30 years later, we're all big friends. You know, it's we're all kind of, Marty said on the first Zoom meeting, he said, yeah, I know what's going to happen. We're going to become rich and successful. We're all going to talking to each other through our lawyers and hating each other, you know. So we made a pact that wasn't going to happen, you know, and that it's more important to be friends after all this time, you know. So it has a great vibe around it, this album. And I think people are kind of, I think they pick up on that. I think they pick up on the fact that this is a rarity, an oddity. I don't know any situations like this, or I can't think of many in my life, you know, where there's so much interest in a record that was made 30 years ago that was never released, you know. So, you know, all you can do is tell the story and be honest about it and hope that people like the music, you know. And one thing I was asked, which I think would be amazing, but we're going baby steps at the moment, is they said, well, what happens if it, you know, if it takes off and then you have to kind of, you know, play gigs and do TVs and stuff. And we all thought, we'd all talked about this and we went, yeah, we could do that. You know, of course we could. If it was right, we would do it, you know, of course we'd do that. So right now we're just letting people know that this is the record that's there, you know, that's like a time capsule from 1989. It's a document, you know, it's kind of a social document as well as a bunch of great songs. You know, we think we've got a lot of singles on this album. So
there are just so many concepts that I don't think that you realize that you put out there that are songs or TV shows. When you talked about the off season from life, the social document, etc. So that is a creative mind that is inspirational. So I'll ask the closer, Frank, and that's any last words for the kids?
Thank you. Sorry, what was it? What was the last question?
Any last words for the kids?
For the kids, well, you know, the kids. Okay, the kids. It's a complicated subject because the kids are probably the most educated generation about music that there is, because they have a whole Alexandrian library of all the best music that's ever been made ever, from, you know, going from you know, all through back through Stravinsky, back to Bach, you know, all the way through bebop and jazz and you know, not to mention rock and the Beatles and you know, African world music. I mean, they have this incredible, literally this feast of music, which just, you know, clicking on YouTube and they can find everything. So the kids that I talk to, the 15, 16, you know, up to 25-year-olds, they are into music big time. They love it. They can't get enough of it, and they find stuff. They love discovering music. They don't care where, you know, where it came from, when it was done. They just love it because it's great music, you know. I think there's a double-edged sword, because I think it's much harder these days. I feel very lucky that I was recording and writing at a time when you could make a living, you know, if you had some success. I think the way things are at the moment, I don't want to turn this into a polemic about the business, but the internet, which has brought incredible benefits and gifts to us. Look at us now talking to each other, right, you know, across the planet. You're in my living room, you know, but it's also driven literally a coach and horses through copyright. And I think until we get the balance right of rewarding artists and creativity, you're not going to have that groundswell of grassroots kind of stuff coming up through the generations, because it's just not viable. You know, a kid who's incredibly musically talented knows that he's in for a life of great sacrifice if he wants to just do music professionally. You know, but kids are also these days, they think in many ways. Everybody's thinking they've got to have a side hustle. So I always say to them, make music your side hustle, you know, and if you hit it big, fantastic, but don't wait for your hit record to pay for your rent, because, you know, there are terrible stories of people getting literally billions of hits on YouTube and getting a check for a couple of $1,000s. I mean, it doesn't compute, you know. Someone's making a vast fortune. People have built massive corporations on the back of, you know, other people's copyrights, basically. And it doesn't just apply to music, it applies to everything, to software, to all of these things. So until people start to feel that there is a value, I mean, Spotify are going close, you know, they've created those kind of platforms have created the sort of the vehicle for going forward. Streaming is great, and you know, and performances, thank goodness, have kept up, you know, on radio and stuff. But I think until the game changes a bit, I think it's going to be very difficult for there to be that kind of surge of creativity that I lived through the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. You know, it was amazing, because each decade defined itself by the music that it created, and each, you know, and it wasn't just one genre. You know, in the 70s you had David Bowie at one end and Kool and the Gang at the other, you know, with Johnny Rotten in the middle, and you know, the Police. So it's like, you know what I mean? There was this incredible surge of creativity, and I worry that these days we haven't created the kind of fertile ground that you need to bring up the next generation of people coming through. I mean, it's fine if you're Kanye West, or if you're, you know, if you're Beyonce. I mean, you can monetize every aspect of your life, and it's terrific. But for someone who's just writing songs or just starting out, there's so much competition. There's so much stuff online. You know, I think Spotify uploads 40,000 songs a week. I mean, my God,
it's a lot.
Who can listen to 40,000 songs a week? You know, it's like,
me.
It's extraordinary. So, you know, in that sense, I feel sorry for this generation, because the dance floor is very crowded. You know, it was always difficult. And don't let me kind of, you know, give you the impression that it was ever easy. It was never easy.
Right.
You had to really work on your stuff, and you had to really fight, and you really had to be good enough, you know, and you had to deliver. I mean, we used to have to work through the night, through 3 or 4 days in a row, in order to deliver something on time, you know, and we loved it. We loved every minute of it, you know. It was like what we lived for, you know. But I think that there is I think until the rules become fairer towards creative people, I think you're not going to have the real talent cutting through. You know, an awful lot of stuff I hear sounds like karaoke to me. You know, it sounds like people just, you know, they can all sing a perfect imitation of Adele, or they can sing a perfect imitation of you know, whoever. I'm trying to think, but, you know, Barry White, for example. But I mean, it's not the real deal. You know, those artists are not coming through. There are some fabulous artists around. I mean, don't get me wrong. We've had, you know, quite apart from the ones I mentioned, you know, we've got Ed Sheeran, who's an amazing songwriter. You know,
right.
Amy Winehouse, you know, fabulous, great girl. What a tragedy. You know, what could she have created now if she was still writing? You know, those people are very, you know, Lady Gaga, they're very old school in their roots and in their tradition, in the way they write songs. You know, a song that was written by them, you can hear when Ed Sheeran sings one of his tunes, you can hear Sam Cooke, you can hear the Beatles, you know, you can hear those things, and yet he's got his own very current, very hip thing, you know, and he's mixing it with grime and with hip hop and with all sorts of things, and with Andrea Bocelli, you know, and it works great. So, you know, power to him. He's an amazing songwriter, but he's one of the few who I would suggest is a real songwriter at the moment. You know, I think records are being cobbled together by teams of specialists, a little bit like someone trying to make a racing car, but nobody knows exactly what the ultimate design is, you know, so you get 9 writers on a song that becomes a hit. I mean, it's a joke, you know, it's not really, that's not songwriting as I know it, you know. I love collaborating, but, you know, two people, 3 people tops, you know. Beyond that, it just becomes like a sort of, you know, becomes a free-for-all, basically, you know.
Not a 9-person collaboration.
So my last word for the kids would be, if you're really passionate about it, completely disregard what I say and just go for it. Because actually, in the end, I always tell all my nephews and, you know, young people I meet, in the end, you know, the only thing that's going to be successful for you is what you put your heart into. Do what you do well, put your heart and soul into it, and you've got a chance of being successful, whatever it is you do, whether you become a chef or you become a salesman or a musician or whatever. You know, I think it'd be crazy to say to somebody who's got fabulous aptitude, really has a shot, to go, you know, don't do music. You should be afraid of it. Don't, you know, of course you should go for it, you know. But all I'm saying is it's harder, you know, it is harder, I think. I feel very lucky, you know, to have, you know, had the chances that I've had in my life. And as you say, it's difficult for people to get those kind of chances these days, I think, you know.
Well, it's coming from a person who actually did it and continues to do it. So Frank, thank you so much for your time, and glad to see these recordings are finally out in the public and we can get them.
It's an absolute pleasure. You know, I'll come back anytime you want me to come back. I'd be very happy to.
Thanks, and hope the album is huge and we have to see you live in New York.
Thank you, Darren. Well, I mean, we're gonna come with this song, and then we've got another one coming through the summer. Possibly have another release in the autumn, and then the album, the whole 10-track album will come out, in the autumn. So, and it'll be a little bit old school. We're going to have vinyl. We're going to have the whole deal. So it will feel like an album for people, hopefully for every generation. But I think the people for whom the 80s is really special, I think they'll be able to look at it and go, okay, I'm going to get my teeth into this, as an album.
I'm never going to say no to vinyl. well, end of the day here for you, Frank. Thank you very much for your time and keep up the greatness.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.